Hello, my name is Chris Madsen. You may have heard of the three guardsmen of Oklahoma. Bill Tillman, Heck Thomas, and I camped on the trail of many an outlaw in the Oklahoma and Indian territories. I was born in Denmark and came to America in January 1876. Within a couple of days, I joined the United States 5th Cavalry. Within a couple weeks, Fort Hays, Kansas was my new home. With just enough time to pick a horse and learn the Signal Corps' wigwag system, I found myself at Fort Laramie, Wyoming Territory. The 5th was needed to force all Indians onto reservations. This was early June 1876. As I recall the events after 6 decades, my memories come back to me easily. My story will begin with my first meeting with a person that would become a lifelong comrade, William Cody. Buffalo Bill had made a grand entrance at Camp Carlin outside of Cheyenne in June 1876. He was an old favorite of the 5th Regiment, having scouted for the regiment a few years previous. We left the Cheyenne area and camped outside of Fort Laramie. An old sergeant and I went to the post early in the morning and were returning to our camp when we were overtaken by Cody. He had eventually spent the night in good company with some of the officers at the post. Early morning on the high plains, even in June, can be quite chilly. Cody was dressed only in his fancy stage suit that made him look more like a Spanish toreador than an army scout. He was shivering non-stop from the cold. The sergeant was an old friend of Cody's. We had picked up a soldier's overcoat left on the road by some overloaded fellow. I gave him the coat. Cody was glad to accept it. Cody slept off his numbness in our tent. When he got up, a handful of silver coins dropped out of his pockets. When I tried to retrieve them for him, he told the sergeant and I that we could keep them. We divided $15, a windfall for poor soldier boys that didn't have a single tail feather left. On the 22nd of June, the regiment headed north over the magnificent iron bridge. It was here I spied my first real Indian chief. To my amazement, fellow veterans pointed out Chief Spotted Tail. The chief stood on the north bank of the Platte, counting heads. I was quite perplexed by his presence. The regiment traversed up the Platte a few miles and then turned north. We passed the remnants of the old government farm used in the past by the fort to grow grain and vegetables. It was abandoned in 1872. The government farm most likely failed because a soldier does not farm. If a career soldier knew how to farm, he'd farm rather than live the tedious life of a soldier. On the night of the 22nd, we camped on the south fork of Rawhide Creek. Rawhide Butte towered above our camp. Our scouts told us that the Rawhide stage station of J.W. Deere, not far from us, had been partially burned by Indians the first week of June. Earlier, one of Deere's stations on Sage Creek further north had also been raided by Indians. Those of us new to the high plains were about to see the elephant, as Americans call it. On the 23rd, we traveled north over rough country, alive with prairie dog towns and the ground carpeted with prickly pears. That night, we bivouacked west of a rock feature I learned later was called the Cardinal's Chair on the running Water River. After a dusty march along Old Woman Creek, we camped along that creek on the night of the 24th. Early the next morning on the 25th, we pushed for the valley of the South Cheyenne River. If we had been here a month earlier, we would have discovered a river with water, but late June found a stream of dust with occasional ponds of creamy soup. The valley stretched as far east and west as a man could behold, and almost as wide. Scattered cottonwoods dotted the defining banks, and the closest grass lay on far-off bluffs. We spent a considerable number of days in the valley, chasing visions of what we believed were Indian braves. Cody was always taking the lead on most scouts. Sometimes he was as much as 2 miles out in advance of the main body. It would be impossible to send a messenger with a report about every suspicion. I had my good stout horse and was an expert in the signal flag business, so I was detailed to go with the chief of scouts, Buffalo Bill. After a couple of scouts, Cody learned that my eyes were better than his. I could see things much farther away than he could. I was excused from other duties to be by his side. I learned much about an Indian's tricks and habits from a seasoned tracker of two-legged prey. The experience would be of great benefit to me in later years, tracking outlaws across the twin territories of Oklahoma. All our essential survival gear we always carried with us. Besides our guns and ammunition, we carried an awning, 3 cubits by 2 cubits, 1 blanket, and a cape. Every man cooked for himself with a cup and a tin plate as his cooking gear. While it lasted, which was never long enough, we hauled some grain for our horse and dried bacon and hardtack for the horse's companion. We did actually annoy a group of savages while in the Great Valley. Our army horses were great on endurance but lacked any sustainable speed. We forced some of those children of the plains to drop supplies appropriated by the United States government, but they were successful, I assume, in joining Sitting Bull in the Powder River Valley. The 30-mile chase did result in 2 deaths. 2 government horses rode by officers did not make the long journey back to camp. On the 1st of July we received a new commander, Colonel Wesley Merritt. He would be the finest officer I ever served under. On the 4th of July, Merritt ordered us south in 3 columns to meet up just north of Hat Creek Station near Mills Falls. Cody was with Merritt's column that rode south along Old Woman Creek. My column headed in a roundabout path, first to the northwest and circled back to Hat Creek Station. I missed by 1 day the grand reunion of some hardened characters of the Old West: Buffalo Bill, Wild Bill Hickok, Joseph White-Eye Anderson, and Colorado Charlie Utter. There must have been more cock and bull tales said around that campfire than one could shake a stick at. The next day Wild Bill, White-Eye, and Charlie headed to Deadwood and Wild Bill's Waterloo. The regiment camped at Hat Creek Station from July 5th to July 12th. My company patrolled up and down along Indian Creek for 3 days. We could have been observed by a couple hundred Indians and never have known it. The terrain was sinister. During this time news arrived of Custer meeting his fate at the Little Bighorn. We knew the time to move west was looming. The call came for us to join General Crook on the Tongue River. The night of July 12th found us camping at Cardinal's Chair, soaked to the bone from a relentless rainstorm. On the 13th we stopped with Rawhide Butte clearly looming on the western horizon. On the day of the 14th we made it as far as the junction of the Fort Laramie Red Cloud Agency Road and Rawhide Creek. A courier brought the news that 1,000 Cheyenne were leaving the Red Cloud Agency for the Powder River. Merritt sent Major Stanton to the Red Cloud Agency to check the situation. When on the 15th a dispatch was delivered that Indians were making their move on the 16th, we mounted at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and headed to Hat Creek Station. Late evening on the 15th we rested on the running water near Cardinal's Chair. At 3 in the morning on the 16th we moved to Hat Creek Station. Our Company A kitchen wagon had overturned on the way and we had nothing to eat. When we got to the infantry camp on Sage Creek, we received some dry bread. Daylight revealed a wagon coming as fast as horses could pull it. All hope was for a kitchen wagon. But the only things we retrieved were a couple of 100 bullets off what was an ammunition wagon. I had been suffering for a week from horrible boils, most probably brought on by a touch of scurvy. I had forgotten what a vegetable even looked like. A steady diet of dried bacon and hardtack to a stomach used to eating a civilized diet was a disaster in the making. I sat down next to a natural spring near the burnt stage station. I drank its cold, clear water as long as there was space in my stomach. It didn't matter. The fever that accompanied the boils wouldn't break. I crawled in between some bushes and hoped they wouldn't find me. I would have been happy if the Indians found me later. I knew that then I would quickly be free of my deadly fever. But my comrades found me and lifted me on my horse. Under the burning sun, shrouded by thick dust clouds, the regiment moved out. With a headache that seemed like it would explode my forehead with every step my horse took, I hung on for dear life. I strained to keep myself in the saddle for the next 20 miles. At last came liberation. My horse fell into a hole, and in the fall I got such a shake-up that the biggest boils burst. In an instant, the fever and headache were over. Late in the evening we arrived at Hat Creek. I would not see Hat Creek Station until some 54 years later.
The summer of 1929, Jim Griffith, Lusk Herald editor, received a letter from his friend R.S. Ellison, a member of the Wyoming Historical Landmarks Commission, asking Griffith to identify the location of the Cody and Yellow Hair fight. Over the decades, the first scalp for Custer, Cody's killing and scalping of Yellow Hair, was disputed time and time again. More than once, Madsen was called upon to relate what he witnessed atop Fortification Butte from his signal watch station. He had the Signal Corps' powerful binoculars, which he said presented the action as if it were a mere 50 yards away. But, as in almost all legend creations, the views of a single man rarely, if ever, can outweigh the high-handed media. In 1929, not only was the fight in dispute, but no one knew where it took place. Chris Madsen was very critical of this Lindno painting. He listed in writing many inaccuracies in its presentation. When General W.C. Brown asked Madsen to point out any mistakes by the painter, Madsen replied that there were too many to name. He stated that it reminded him of a lot of drunken cowboys getting out of a western town after having a good time and running the city officers into a cave. Jim Griffith enlisted Al Runquist and Ralph Ollinger, both of Lusk, to assist him in locating the site. They soon realized that the quest would not be an easy one. Retired Brigadier General W.C. Brown joined the team assisting from his office in Denver. In July 1930, the Lusk men brought along General Charles King and United States Deputy Marshal Chris Madsen, the only living members present in 1876, to lend their memories to the search. Madsen, an old friend of Buffalo Bill, spent many summers atop Lookout Mountain after Cody's death. He was close friends with Johnny Baker, Cody's adopted son. When Madsen started from Oklahoma to Lusk in 1930 to join the group, he first stopped in Denver. From there, Baker drove him to Lusk. King, in his mid-80s, was frail, and his memory struggled to remember events and places from decades ago. Madsen, no spring chicken himself, was still robust with a sharp mind. The group were able to find the exact location, with the final confirmation coming from Madsen. The dispute over the location was agreed upon by all those involved in the hunt, even the stubborn, aged King. After hearing Madsen's recollections, King had to admit Madsen's memory was much clearer than his after so many years. The following is a series of photos of that great hunt from the personal collection of Chris Madsen. Photo 1 is Madsen and Baker atop Lookout Mount before heading to Lusk in July 1930. Photo 2 is Johnny Baker at the Hat Creek Station Monument in 1930. Photo 3 is Griffith, King, who was 85 that summer. Madsen, Ollinger on the hunt. Photo 4 is Griffith, King, Madsen, Ollinger scanning the horizon. Photo 5 shows Griffith, Madsen, King, and Ollinger taking a lunch break. Photo 6 depicts Runquist, King, Griffith, Madsen, with King and Griffith in consultation. Photo 7 with Baker and Madsen considering the possibilities. Photo 8 has Runquist, Baker, Madsen, Griffith at the point where Yellow Hair was killed. Photo 9 is a vintage view of Fortification Butte, observed from the northwest. Photo 10 depicts Runquist with Fortification Butte in background and him standing in the bottom where the Indians were headed. Photo 11 is identical to 10, but note the letter X, where Madsen observed the Cody and Yellow Hair duel. Photo 12 pictures the Hat Creek bottom in July 1930. Photo 13 with Madsen standing at the bottom of Hat Creek next to the main crossing. Photo 14 has Hat Creek flowing lazily below Fortification Butte. Photo 15 has Runquist at the spot where Yellow Hair was killed, designated by the X. Finally, on September 6, 1934, two monuments, one marking the involvement of the 5th Cavalry, sitting atop Fortification Butte, and one monument marking the location where Cody killed Yellow Hair, were ready for dedication. This ceremony was preceded by the dedication of two monuments at Fort Robinson the day before September 5th. One monument to Lieutenant Levi H. Robinson and another to Crazy Horse. All four monuments were the result of the efforts of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Madsen attended the Fort Robinson ceremony. In his personal archival collection was a program from the Fort Robinson dedication. Also in the Chris Madsen family archives was a photo taken of the Indian camp. It was said that over 1,000 Indian warriors, accompanied by their families, attended the ceremony. Madsen stated that it was the largest gathering of Indian warriors since the Custer Massacre. When the Indians learned that Madsen had fought against them at Hat Creek and Slim Buttes, they insisted he sit on the platform with the Indian chiefs. They also convinced him to have his picture taken with a chief that was also present for both battles, Chief White Buffalo. The Hat Creek battle monuments were dedicated on September 6, 1934. Madsen had several photos taken and several sent to him by A.E. Sheldon, Secretary of the Nebraska State Historical Society. The following are photos from the Chris Madsen archives. Photo 1 shows Captain Way, brother-in-law of Johnny Baker, and Madsen at Lookout Mountain before heading to Fort Robinson and Montrose. Johnny Baker passed away in 1931. Photo 2 is the newly placed 5th Cavalry Monument placed atop Fortification Butte. View is from the southeast. Photo 3 is the 5th Cavalry Monument placed from where Madsen watched the engagement between Cody and Yellowhair. Photo 4 is a closer view of the 5th Cavalry Monument atop the butte. View here is from the south. Photo 5 is the plaque on the 5th Cavalry Monument. The plaque honors the 7 troops of the 5th and Colonel Merritt. Photo 6 is the monument marking the location of the fight between Cody and Yellowhair. Note, the plaque reads, "or Yellow Hand." Photo 7 is the Cody and Yellowhair monument viewed from the southwest. Note, the lone wagon in background. Photo 8 shows those people gathered for the dedication on September 6, 1934. This was the Cody Monument dedication. Photo 9 is a close-up of the Cody and Yellowhair plaque. Madsen insisted that some sort of wagon was trailing the 2 couriers that were approaching from the southwest. Photo 10 depicts Runquist, Captain Way, Ollinger, Madsen, and Mrs. Baker at the Cody and Yellowhair Monument. Photo 11 pictures Madsen far left and Mrs. Baker to the right of the 5th Cavalry Monument, wearing a white hat. I'm not sure who the young ladies were.